So I'm here
Thank you very
talking
much.
with Kishan, and Kishan, we were just talking about the 5 stages of Osho dynamic meditation, which I've been doing every morning. And I was also mentioning that I'm going to France in the end of June this year, 2026, to get involved in the residency program with retribalize.ai. And that's happening in the south of France. And this Osho dynamic meditation is one of the classes which I'd like to teach and share with the residency. And you mentioned that you just come from the south of France, and I was wanting to ask you
Yeah, yeah,
what was
yeah.
coming up
That's
as we
that's
were
super
talking about that.
interesting.
Yeah.
So there were like two thoughts happening at once at the same time. Because you mentioned the intensity of the program, the beauty of how it's kind of you progress a social um, battery, or let's say being able to handle more. And I kind of felt a resonance with that because when I was at the south of France doing when I was at the eco village, um, it was such a profound experience to be surrounded by people all the time and to really make like a mental note for myself. Bro, you're literally also an in for yourself to self-regulate. Because when I was in the course, there were like a few moments that I felt um, that I needed to pause for a moment and be like, okay, what is still my energy? Um, Especially in these spaces when you're co-regulating with people and you're doing these meditations, these releases in a shared space. So I just thought that was interesting. So that immediately came to mind when you said that.
Hmm. Okay, well, so I want to ask about that. So you're sort saying that doing these uh, practices for healing and expansion, such as, for example, Osho dynamic meditation, can really put us in the face of our own boundaries and our own limits. And that can actually, it can push us and stretch our capacity, but it can also show us what our capacity is and teach us how to contain ourselves in the context of a social setting that is potentially quite chaotic or open-ended. Did I get it?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yes. Yes.
And so which eco
But
village
also
were you
to
staying in,
respect
and,
your
and what
capacity.
happened there? Yeah, yeah, yeah. You still there? I want to ask you which eco village were you visiting and what did you get up to?
I was in the south of France at the cat farm,
Okay.
and I was learning how to build with mud and straw.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's beautiful. I just saw a post of retribalize. I actually sent it to you because I was curious if you were going to it, and now you confirmed it pretty much. So maybe you wanna tell me more about that. That's also super exciting.
Well, I will. I just want to say I wish that I knew more skills involving building with mud and clay and straw, and brick and working with r resources that are less energy dense, and I feel that these kind of practical skills are the currency of the future, and I feel that many people are broke within the within that currency. So I feel that there's a lot of value to doing that kind of thing. Um, and I'd also be super interested to hear about the program that you've been part of. I forget what the name of it is, but maybe we could circle back to that.
Cat farm.
No, no, but you're part of a
Yeah,
program that sent you there, right?
yeah, yeah. It's called the Erasmus
Yeah,
program,
Erasmus. Yes, exactly. Um,
but
so
it was part of a youth exchange. So it was quite a different group from what I initially intended to join. It was a lot of much younger people, so that was quite interesting. Um, yeah, how was it? It was both uh, exciting, exhausting, revitalizing. Um, it's like very easy to go with the flow and to get like fully engaged, but also maybe sometimes get carried away, and then you're like, oof, yeah, I need to take a step back. I need to go for a stroll, and it's in the rurals, France. It's quite beautiful. There are these beautiful hills and ruins, and each day we had a full day packed with courses, consent workshops, workshops on the functioning of the eco village and ideas for the future, um, workshops on uh, contact improv, and then also these um, um, sustainable ways of building workshops where we where we just went through the logistics, but also the benefits versus like building with cement, for example, and also being enlightened how dead most of the materials are that we use in our um, I would say modern civilization, because they explain it like this, that cement, because it's like went through a very intensive heating process, it's very energy intensive, and even afterwards the material itself, it's completely water resistant, but um, it doesn't have the same quality of organicness that clay and wood and the mud houses still have, even though yes, they're less durable for very long periods of time. That's why they need to be um, taken care of. But overall, they're quite resistant.
Mm, mm. Yeah, there's a couple of framings I could sort of add there that might help a bit. Like, I understand that through the work of Vaclav Smil, there are like four main kind of products that essentially inform um, modern construction. So we've got like cement, plastic, oil, and I'm forgetting the fourth one at the moment.
Metal,
Steel, yeah. And
steel,
and and these products are all like very energy intensive to construct, like each of them requiring like city-state level infrastructure, not the sort of thing that can be built by like a small village. And the developed world is going through an infrastructure crisis, very much so in the States, for example, where a lot of the infrastructure that they built during the 20th century is falling apart, and we don't necessarily have the energy to keep replacing all of the infrastructure every so often. So sort of part of the context here is with an energy transition, sort of having passed peak oil, when we have far less oil economically available to us, well, how can we build resilient and durable infrastructure without access to the same amount of energy? And one way is to start finding other building materials, like the ones that you've been working with. So this is sort of, for me, it's in the context of transitioning to a circular materials economy. So
yes.
rather than perpetuating these extraction and pollution dynamics in the world, where we just sort of go to all the indigenous heritage sites and extract all of the valuable resources that we need, and then create some breakable uh, infrastructure with them, and then put the waste all back into the ocean and the rivers usually. Instead, can we create in a way which doesn't have any externalities or open loops as a result? And it's quite tricky to transition in that way. And that's sort of um, that's sort of one of the dynamics of relating to the meta crisis in terms of architecture and in terms of physical construction. Um, and I could use, like, at the same time there, I could bring in one of the frames from Marvin Harris, who wrote a book called Cultural Materialism. Um, he's a sort of, I think, in sort of ecological neo-Marxist perspective, I think. Anyway, it doesn't rely on Marxism at all, this perspective. I just want to say that there's like a three-layer stack that you sort of invoked, which is like we've been talking about like the material infrastructure, literally like what building material we're using and what is everything built out of. And there's a transition from a linear extraction-based model to a circular materials economy, as I said. But sort of on top of that, you were maybe learning something about the local governance, right? So it's like the second layer is like the fields of agreement, social agreement that we inhabit together so as to live together, right? So institutions like science or like the government or like the legal system, for example, or the healthcare system, or thinking of other examples here, basically like how to do the like what we actually get up to together. And similarly, with that kind of, you could say social technology or social institutions, there's a transition, right, from modernist and postmodern variants on social institutions to something that is more local scale and circular in the same kind of a way. Um, as an example, how can we actually do a local governance model that actually works? Or sort of can we recognize that what we've been sold as democracy actually isn't really democracy, it's actually crony capitalism. And so if that were the case, well, then how can we innovate new forms of governance at a local or broader than local scale that reflect the values that we hold collectively? And I'll finish this off. I'll just say that sort of there's a third layer above that. I was talking about like the social agreement fields. But on top of that, there's something higher in a sense, and it's about the values which guide us. So it's like the answer to our question of what's the meaning of life, or what should we do when we live? What is our philosophy? What is our culture? What is our spirituality or our religion? What guides us, and what informs the shaping of our um, material infrastructure and social agreement fields? Um, and similarly, in that kind of more cultural dimension, there's also space for sort of renovation and invention. Like, right, we need new cultures to support people in circa 2026 and the rest of the 21st century. And, this is very much connected to um, healing work, um, embodiment work, relational work. And this is where I bring in my contributions. I think most of my work is within that sort of cultural sphere, right? I talk about this ecology of practices, um, which is definitely interfacing with our social agreement fields and the circular materials economy, but is not directly related to them. It's more cultural innovation. So I can sort of connect those topics by saying that one of my reasons for going to the south of France to participate in the residency program with Christian Bell and the other people at Retribalize AI is that I feel that I'm able to contribute. Specifically, I'm able to contribute an ecology of practices involving a whole range of different practices for connection and healing and inspiration and so on, to essentially facilitate that for their residency program going forwards. And so my intention is to go there to develop the kinds of relationships that are needed to support that. Yeah, so for me, it's a wonderful opportunity to build new collaborative relationships and to actually move toward implementing this ecology of practices that I've been speaking about in a real world context with other collaborators, I might add. Sorry, I know that was a lot of words, but how does that all land with you?
So, relating back to looking for long-term, sustainable, and circular loops, let's say, closed loops, is it's quite challenging to find innovation within the structural context or the architectural context, within already like the infrastructures of cities and where the majority of people live, and to it's quite easier to bring cultural innovation, to bring awareness to um, the ways in which have been moving from places of capitalism and have been moving from places that aren't regenerative for a long extent of time. And there's like for me personally in my own journey, for me it's always been quite about the balance of both the internal work but also the external work. And most of my practices have been revolving around finding a balance between those two aspects. Hence why the paper that I wrote is called On Architecting Ecological Bodies in Symbiotic Harmony. It's a lot of words, but that's
Mm.
deeply, deeply going into how can these practices of healing also practically, physically manifest themselves into the infrastructure of how we live. And it's quite profound how the, let's say, the evolution of consciousness of humans, uh, we have through that process defined ourselves out of the definition of nature. Hence why I would say there's somewhat of an alienation towards nature. There's human civilization and there's nature civilization, which is quite bizarre. So in that sense, we've domesticated ourselves. We have then also, let's say, sterilized the materials that we use for building our homes. We have sterilized ourselves, that we've become so unfamiliar with all the natural resources and regenerative possibilities, um, that even when we take, let's say, inspiration from indigenous ways of living
Mm.
or medicines, we take it, we we don't stay true to the natural ways of how they're used. We process them so much with other artificial products that the actual thing loses its magic.
Mm.
It's the same with finding a well of a fountain of water, water of immortality,
Mm.
but putting it in a bottle and selling it mass, on
Mm.
mass scale.
Mm.
But then over time, it's the essence losing its value to a point that the water uh, of immortality doesn't work anymore. And so what's actually happened in our modern day society is fragmentation on so many different kinds of levels, on the material plane, the mental body, the physical body, the soul body, and then entire disconnection from, let's say, soul and spirit and nature. And to add a layer to that is that um, by this defining out of nature, we became afraid of it, and this fear, because we've lost this wholeness with it, this connection, this wholeness in ourselves. It's a misidentification where this wholeness that we miss in ourselves, we started to move from this place of control, control with controlling the agriculture, controlling how we grow foods, controlling how we um, plant trees, and everything controlled, everything pre-designed, and um, perhaps changing the flow of rivers and not knowing that it can damage and destroy an entire ecosystem, or even that our foods again lose its vitality. Um, so coming back to the building, we're still nature. It's not that humans have become non-nature. We're still nature, but because we don't recognize our own nature, we've stopped ourselves from growing. And when we look at nature, um, it's the place of consistent birth and co-creation. Birthing and co-creation. That's actually, if you look at the Latin origins of nature, it's about birthing and co-creation. But that can't that process naturally cannot evolve if you're hyper controlling, if you're always occupied with guiding the process without actually allowing things to just be. And it reflects in our architecture. It doesn't grow, it's all static, it's all dead. And that's how deserts are created, literal deserts. Yeah. Um, and it's indeed, if you were to bring this conscious, that's part of my journey in life, is to really seek um, on both the cultural, the inner world, the outer world. How can we find that harmony for reintroducing this co-creation and not be afraid of it? Um, Also, not be afraid of nature, our own nature.
Wow, Kishan. Well, there's about 400 things that I'd like to say, but I wanted to try to paraphrase what you said. Like essentially, because there was a lot there, right? Essentially, you're talking about a very old form of disconnection. It seems like a long, long, long time ago, we became deeply disconnected from our nature. And there are many consequences to that, including the profaning or the disenchantment of the world, the the introduction of systems of control and domination, um, in such a way that leads to constipation, like literally like damming up rivers. And I've seen this where uh, people create a big blockage in a river and it dams up everything and completely changes the entire landscape. And the point is that it creates not only literal deserts, but cultural deserts. And how, broadly speaking, the rough direction toward some kind of a meaningful response to that situation is to reconnect in a symbiotic, co-creative way with not only each other, but with nature itself, and to recognize ourselves in and as nature. And I obviously deeply, deeply resonate with that. And I was actually really hoping to talk with you about this topic. And I want to introduce a little bit more of like I'm sort of in the context here of being in the middle of reading this experimental phenomenology, which is sort of this like style of philosophy that tries to point to our immediate present moment experience of what's actually going on here. And it strikes me that one of the like something that you already spoke about, right, is that well, we're here together as people, and in some sense, we've been quite focused on what we've been up to, what we've been doing in this conversation. But what's something that's also present is the context in which we've been speaking, which is more like it's closer to a mode of being or the place from which we're speaking rather than what we're speaking about. And like I might describe that mode of being as something like sharing, I don't know, and slightly watching what I'm saying because of the recording. And it's like it's a particular mode, or it's quite intellectual today for me.
It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be, no.
It doesn't have to be. It's also like this interesting paradox of like becoming extra self-conscious the moment when you press the record button, and all of the sudden there's a additional observer to the dialogue that we're having. But it's funny. I've
Mm,
also had that in the beginning. Um, but then after some time, I was like, what if I ignore that that is a factor?
mm,
Can I, mm, instead of from my heady place, can I move and articulate also from my heart space and let some breath come into my thinking pattern where maybe I let go of thinking and I just let it come and go, and even with reciprocating or receiving what you say and really receive what you say.
mm. Well, in that context, you were invoking like the Latin etymology of nature, having to do with reconnecting with the quality of giving birth, and of I felt also of aliveness, of the quality of emergent aliveness. Um, and that was sort
Mm.
of showing up in our conversation as just letting it unfold, just seeing what wants to emerge, seeing what comes up in real time without trying to control or direct the conversation too much. Um, and so reconnecting with nature can happen in real time as reconnecting with whatever is coming up as it's coming up, connecting with the quality of what is being born here, what is being given birth to here. And in this way, it's a way of like taking up the perspective of the mother, in a sense. When we embody or remember the perspective of the mother, then by virtue of doing that, we can give birth to whatever is emerging through us. It's also what I understand the essence of
Mhm.
facilitation to be about.
Mm. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. I'm trying to recall something that you said. Um, yeah, what mode of being does one move from? And often it's um, a lack of presence. And so many people struggle with this actually, a lack of presence. Um, and from what place are you actually moving from, speaking from, being from? And that until we've actually become fully aware of that, that is actually a factor or an energy that can drive us, like as long as one doesn't even notice it, people can continue moving on like that for extremely long periods of time. And um,
Mm,
I feel like the work actually begins the moment that you become aware of it, that then you can fully practice, in a sense, um, a beautiful form of presence and reconnection.
mm,
And it's often when we we don't even try or chase anything. Most of
Mm.
modern day society is very much fixated on the chase of things, the control of things, of um, going after your goals and being successful and having some form of not success, but security. Yes,
Mm.
and as long as we're in that mode, that's just actually more of a, it's energetically very much outward.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm.
that's Maya. That's the 3D world, the outward fixation, and without ever having to have gained inner perspective or looking through the inner perspective, what that even is. Huh? Um, where did I want to go with that? But yeah, yeah, most people struggle with that.
Yeah, I really resonate with this distinction that you're naming, which reminds me of something from the philosopher Erich Fromm. He talked about two different modes of being that we inhabit, one of them being the having mode and the other one being the being mode. And in the having mode, we like to consume, we like to have things, and reductively, that kind of a mode of being is quite addictive. We have people, or we have a fancy car, we have possessions, or we have ideas, and we sort of get these things and we look for them in the world and we try to attain them or achieve them. And so in a way where there's a kind of compulsive doing that I see in many people, including myself,
Mm.
that enables us
Mhm.
to have things in order to try to feel fulfilled. Usually doesn't work because we're sort of like hungry ghosts who cannot be filled by consuming and consuming in the myriad of ways. And so Eric Fromm sort of invoked this other mode of being, which is the being mode, which has to do obviously more with being rather than doing. Um, it relates to like our developmental needs, our needs for belonging, our needs for becoming more than we have been. And we can't find fulfillment in the being mode by having things, but by being in deep relation with each other. And so that allows me to draw out this quality of being deeply attuned to each other in the conversation rather than trying to get somewhere in the conversation, trying to say any point in particular. It's rather more about trying to be more deeply available in the present moment.
Mm.
And it's this quality of, um, yeah, beneath the different perspectives, the perspective of Kishan and the perspective of Sam and the perspective of any viewer, beneath these perspectives, there's a shared dialogue that we're all participating in. And
Mm.
it's when I give myself to that participation without trying to achieve something is when I feel completely at
Mm.
ease with the conversation and completely fulfilled and whole, to
Yes,
use the word that you used.
we're
I wanted
playing.
to,
We're
we
playing with
are,
ingredients.
we are. I wanted to invoke the title of your thesis again because you named it just before, and I wanted to draw it out a little bit.
Yes,
Would you mind repeating the title?
yes. On architecting evolving ecological bodies in symbiotic harmony.
On architecting ecological bodies, evolving ecological bodies
In symbiotic harmony.
in symbiotic harmony. So, can we break it down a little bit? So, to architect something, what does that
Yes.
mean to you? What does it mean to architect something?
To architect is to understand the fundamentals of the universe, creation, preservation, and destruction. And to architect is to really tap into our creative potential of being part of nature, of being part of co-creation. Um, and then the evolving is mainly um, following the our evolution of human consciousness. Um, hold on, following.
Hang on, I want to pause. I want to pause for a sec. I want
Hmm,
to take it really slow. Like I want to make sure that
ah,
with architecture, we're not talking about engineering, right? We're not talking about and forgive me for this reduction of engineering, but engineering can be to sort of implement a top-down structure, which is like it's going to look like this, and it's sort of designed in a very human ego-y way. Like we want it to be like this, and that's what it's going to look like.
yes.
Whereas architecture is more about designing in such a way that it sort of goes with nature. How do I describe that? It's kind of like uh, aligning the natural emergence of phenomena with the higher order principles that inform our universe, um, which I would call the archetypes, but you could call the ideas or the forms in a Platonic sense. But it's about like there are these laws or principles that seem to govern and form our cosmos, our universe. And architecture seems to me to be some kind of design that facilitates the work of nature in alignment with those principles. Does that resonate with you as a an understanding of architecture?
Yes, yes. It also closely resonates with my own artistic practice of drawing my inspiration mainly from nature and mainly um, seeing how we can architect in co-creation with nature.
And then you mentioned evolving.
Yes,
And you were talking earlier about how reconnecting with in a sense, the sacred source of our nature rather than the profane impact of our engineering egoic mind. Reconnecting with the source or reconnecting with our nature um, allows a certain kind of development or evolution which has been constrained or which has been foreclosed, prevented. So something is unlocked, there's an evolutionary potential which is opened with this kind of work. Does that sound about right?
yes. What I can say about that is more so by co-creating with nature to truly understand the nature of nature, that it is only birthing because it is consistent change. That is the only truth, that the universe is consistent change. That is the only consistency, actually. And if you were to embody that, we would be also alongside it adaptive and continuously evolving.
Hmm. So it's taking evolution or being born and being born and being born and being born. It's sort of taking that
Yes.
as an architectural or structural invariant feature,
Yes.
phenomenological feature of being. And then it's in the same way of like imitating the creator and so creating, so imitating evolution and so evolving. It's that kind of a thing in harmony with nature in the sense of ecological, in a way that recognizes the impermanence and the fragility of the interconnected web of all life and understands that I am because we are, right? And that we've been given a sacred responsibility to steward and fit in to nature in such a way that honors ecology, that honors the wholeness and the integrity of that wholeness. Does that resonate as a description of ecology?
Yes,
Mm.
I would say so.
And then
And more
bodies.
profound, so
Yeah,
that you
yeah.
mentioned that there is something that prevents it from evolving. Um, and more so seeing it as a linear structure, I would say it more as a process of our continuous remembrances and forgetting, um, but also um, mm, 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 I would say that
Mm.
Yeah, I'm interested in the part of the thing that hinders evolution,
Mm.
the thing that keeps us actually spiraling, the thing that actually prevents us from
Mm.
breaking out of conditioning.
Earlier, you were talking about fear
Yes.
in connection with the profaning of the world. And I wonder if that feels relevant here. In other places I've talked about fear as a force of awakening. Fear is something that can deeply wake people up, make people feel alive. Like, oh no, it's scary. But that's maybe um fright in a sense, or like alarm in a sense. Whereas fear, in the way that we're talking about it,
I
is maybe
I,
here
I
more.
think
Yeah,
I think it might fright,
or
perhaps
alertness.
perhaps
It's a,
both fright and alertness, but also this deep sense of knowing priorly that feels a discontentment, or at least some kind of feeling of something is missing, something is not right. And I
mm,
believe it really depends on the individual, but some people innately have it within them that, let's say, they become aware that they are dreaming, and they go along the dream. They go along with the busyness of that reality. They participate, but they don't know why. And that particular question of why is actually the very fertile ground um, for this process to seek, uh, um,
wow.
because that's where this feeling of incompleteness can exist, of like something is missing. I know there is wholeness. I know there's more beyond this current reality that everyone is portraying in this dream. I want to die. Not and people who have this feeling often misunderstand that, and that it's actually a psychological death, a spiritual death, and not actually the physical death. And then people go through depression.
Wait, help me
Um,
understand the
um,
connection there. I don't want to lose the thread. So you're sort of talking about uh, when we can recognize the deep mystery, the unknowable, the utterly unknowable quality of the mystery as it's unfolding before our eyes. It's like being in touch with the mystery. Socrates said, wisdom begins in wonder. So being in touch with like wonder, the sense of wonder allows us to open to the mystery, right? Through awe and wonder. Well, then we have this quality where philosophy so in the context of lucidity, being lucid in the sense of lucid dreaming, right? Being lucid or being present, being aware, being alert, being here, being available to experience as it unfolds. In the context of lucidity, philosophy as an antidote to fear. So this is deeply philosophy as prayer. This is philosophy as an antidote to fear, right? So, and really,
mm,
really, in the sense of wisdom begins in wonder. Philosophy is that which opens us to the why,
mm-hmm,
which is,
mm-hmm,
and asking
mm-hmm.
that why is a revolutionary question. It's a radical
Yes,
question. There's something so Promethean, so Luciferian about asking why. Why is it that way? And if that question can be genuine, if it's in the sense of a koan, what is this? What is this? What is this? Why is a kind of version of that. This is why I'm sitting here reading books like experimental phenomenology, because they can point to and through aspects of our experience as it unfolds and bring that into view and allow us to ask why. And that's the power of that is uh it's a force for consciousness. It's a force for awakening, and it's a force for the evolution of humanity, um, which strikes me as inherently good.
yes.
And
But
but then
many
you then you
people,
connected it then you connected it to death.
Yes.
And I wanted to understand the connection to death.
So to not lose the thread at all, we were talking about to not lose the connection. Hold on. Because priorly before that we were talking about something else. Um, can you help me with that?
Yeah, we were talking about architecturing,
Yes, the
on
thing that
architecting.
hinders us
Yeah.
from evolution.
Ah,
And
yes.
then we were started talking about fear and fright.
Hmm.
And
So it's kind of like fear as a force of forgetfulness, that which forces us to remain unconscious, right?
yes,
That which is undifferentiated. Because why is a differentiating question? It's an opening, expanding question. You know,
yes,
um, that's interesting because that's a kind of earlier we were talking about the profaning of the world in connection with fragmentation and fragmented awareness, which is deeply true, right? Like our attention has become so piecemeal. So like everything is incredibly fragmented, right down to atomic theory, right? This goes back a long time when we started living in a more fragmented way. Then our metaphysics and our way of being in the world became much more fragmentary.
whoa,
But
yeah,
then what we were talking about here was a kind of fragmentation which is not random or chaotic, but which has order. So we were talking about the question why as a force of differentiation. It's a question that uh, reveals or exposes consciousness. And there's a way that it seems to me that our consciousness sort of emerged at some point, although I wouldn't want to say emerged from what, because I think it sort of had to be there the whole way along. You know, it didn't emerge out of nothing or out of just pure matter. Um, Consciousness seems to come first in some profound way. But the connection there is that we were talking about the question why and the practice of philosophy as a beneficial form of differentiation, differentiation as a source of consciousness, which is the right kind of differentiation, not fragmentation. Um, anyway, we were connecting that then with the lack of that. The lack of that is a kind of forgetfulness. The lack of that is a kind of forgetfulness which is um, undifferentiated, and it doesn't allow consciousness to develop, doesn't allow consciousness to emerge
yes,
or to arise or
yes.
to evolve.
I would say it goes even deeper than that. It's something that takes away sovereignty, that we don't even feel we have the capacity to question. And so this, let's say, this skill for discernment is not practiced or ever developed. It's just taken away from very early stages, um, early stages of consciousness that is so fragile and so pure, um, that that kind of conditioning immobilizes this capacity for awareness. And I do believe, well, many cases can be different, but I do believe a major factor can be the conditions in which um, consciousness is brought up in, whether it is already within a deeply fragmented environment, or if it is still somewhat closely connected to nature, or even education can play a huge factor. Um, some
Mm,
cases being that um, people tend to be more creative and imaginative. Um, People who sometimes don't go to school versus people who went to school and
mm,
kind of lost that capacity because our educational systems don't really focus on those kinds of qualities, instead of allowing pure consciousness
mm,
to be, let's say, innocent and questioning about the world. They fill you in with
Brilliant.
ideas and concepts of how it is in that perspective
So
of
standardization,
of
totally, totally.
standardization to
Standardization.
connect it to a system and a world
Mm,
that is only for the benefit of a machine, capitalism, to keep it running,
mm.
which is deeply tragic in a sense.
Anathema to education. Literally, the original sense of a liberal education, meaning to liberate into one's own nature, right? And there's nothing
Yes,
liberating about indoctrination into a global world order. Literally, like
yes,
the
yes,
Australian education system is sort of adopting policies where the public school system sort of mandates teachers to teach that students will like need to perform on a curriculum which is devoted to becoming sort of global citizens like as per this sort of international agenda, um, which is, you know, again, anathema to education. But like, if think about this, think about that question, why, in connection with children, in the sense of ye shall become like little children, right? This is straight from the Bible, right? Like, there's something deeply virtuous and deeply wise
mm,
about being able to ask why, and being able to connect with the unfiltered spontaneity and improvisation of asking genuine questions, right? Without trying to fit into a system, right? Without having one's own nature be uh, artificially and constrained by the need for standardization. To a degree, like
tailored.
I don't want to, yeah, tailored. I don't want to be too strong on that because culture is that force inherently. Like we're sort of talking about neurodivergence as an agent of consciousness expansion because being who we are in our neurodivergence allows us to ask the question why. And that's how we discover new things. That's how things move along. That's how we evolve. But culture inherently constrains everything, always. But that's kind of the purpose of culture. The issue is that cultures become homogenized when we started to live in groups of more than 150 people.
Mm.
I'm saying specifically when we decided to start living in groups bigger than the Dunbar range of about 150 people, then we sort of changed sociological forms in the agrarian revolution. We stopped being nomadic hunter-gatherers and we started being sedentary agriculturalists. And that's the origin of empire. It's also the origin of civilization as we understand it. And what I'm saying is that civilization itself was the response to a certain kind of problem, namely, how do we solve multipolar traps that keep us in states of tribal warfare? And we discovered that civilization doesn't really work as a solution to that problem. And part of the reason that it doesn't work as a solution to that problem is not only that civilization has life cycles of rising and falling and destruction that we're about to be in as our civilization falls down around us, but also that um, when we are enculturated into a civilizational superstructure that decontextualizes us and standardizes us out of the context of our bodies, out of the context of our environments, and toward invariant structural features of whatever system we happen to be a part of, then it disconnects us from the source of human nature. Ian McGilchrist has talked about this in terms of the tyranny of the left brain. This is a left hemispheric way of thinking, which was the same problem that the Romans ran into and the same problem that the Greeks ran into. The course of civilization itself follows an arc that impedes creativity when the left brain starts to dominate. And the way it starts to dominate is through bureaucracy and systemization and standardization and designing, as in the sense of engineering human nature to be what the elites want it to be. And it's not what we want it to be at all. We want to be in local community. We want to be grounded. We want to be connected with our own bodies, with the constraints that are literally embodied that make us who we are. We want to be in close relationships that make us who we are, right? That draw out the essence of our nature. This is what it means to be human. And it's not standardized at all. That's what culture is. And in that sense, local culture, less than the Dunbar range of 150 people, meaning tribes, that is a force for enabling us to connect with who we really are. It's not just a force of standardization. Um, Another way to say that is that the force which standardizes and disembeds and disconnects is not a cultural force. It's something very demonic that people call the stack or the or Moloch or you know the system, essentially,
Mhm.
and it doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah. So
Well, hang on, we're almost at the end of the
that's what
title.
makes
So
die.
on architecting evolving ecological bodies, we talked a bit about embodiment here in the sense of
Yes.
being for embedded and embodied. So what it means to be embodied is that uh, our nervous system is literally distributed throughout our whole body, right? So we're talking about the way that the constraints that we live within, namely the constraints of our own body, shape and condition our consciousness in a beneficial way, in a way which is restricting and delimiting, so that our consciousness doesn't completely expand into just unity, but it gives us some perspective or uniqueness, could say.
Mm.
Is there anything that you'd want? I mean, the embodiment is obviously an entire topic, but is there anything that you want to touch on the topic of embodiment? Why is it bodies that are, why is it evolving ecological bodies?
So I didn't directly describe it in my thesis like that, but um, everything is a body. Even the completeness, even an entire dissolution, even universe consciousness is a body. And the moment when you see that everything is inside that body, and everything in that body, in that body, in that body, in that body, and we can go entirely to the macrocosm of things, or go to the absolute um, microcosm of something. And um,
So embodiment is scale invariant. Embodiment is a fractal reality.
yes,
Sorry to
but
interrupt.
embodiment is also perfect play between both the container and the life force. That is what makes a body. Even dimensions, they always have a container and a flow. It's with every single essence of the universe.
Can I turn that back in a reflective way on our
Of course.
conversation here? I- Imagine that this conversation has a kind of flow, right? Like it seems to me that the way that we're talking shows that this conversation has a body of its own.
Mhm.
This conversation is embodied. It's another way to say this is that the conversation has a life of its own. There is a spirit of the conversation which is binding us and holding us together in this conversation. And I'm not sure I would agree that the conversation itself is embodied, but it's an interesting way to imagine a conversation. Um, because I guess the risk I'm thinking of here is that if we imagine that the sort of spirit of the conversation, if you will, has its own body, we could run the risk of turning it into a thing or reifying it in a way which I feel is unfaithful to the essence of the logos, or the it's kind of like this fiery quality which binds the conversation together and which inspires us. There's a way that I feel that what's important about that quality is that it's not embodied, but I might be wrong, and I just wanted to ask your opinion.
That's a very interesting paradox. And that's also kind of the tied to a different philosophy or writing of mine, which is not connected to my thesis, but my magic book. I wrote about Genesis and my own personal experience of Genesis, and it perfectly connects with the idea of the container and the flow, the life force. The container being the divine masculine as a principle of the universe, and the flow being the divine feminine. The container being the vessel and the um, finite, the flow being the infinite. Um, and at some point, if you try to define or which is what, you will completely lose yourself in that infinity, and um, yang will become yin, and yin will become yang again. Eventually, you will eventually meet that paradox, which is super exhilarating. and kind of entirely brings you back to square one, which is amazing. But I would say when you can just be and allow, as I understand Genesis. One time I was playing handpan on a psychedelic, and I was in a beautiful flow state, so profoundly beautiful. I did a sequence that was so beautiful, and I've only been able to do this specific sequence, I'd say, 3 times in my life. Only when I stopped thinking. And that moment I felt like, this is Genesis. This is birth. This is nature. I am the birther and that which is being birthed at the same time. There is no separation between me and the sound and the playing. I am the play. I am the being. I am the observer that is observed. I am. And I got so excited, I wanted to film myself. I got my camera, I got everything ready, and then I couldn't do it because I thought about it,
Mm.
how to tap into that sequence again. I couldn't do it. And I believe that that is also, well, I wouldn't say it is the root of suffering, but it's definitely where um, wholeness is lost. And it really depends what you do in that moment. Do you chase after it to reclaim, or do you accept and know it's always there? It's always with me. It is a part of me. I am it. I can accept as things come and go. But one who does not understand what's happening, consciousness that does not understand what's happening, panics. Panics and goes into the mode of, I've lost something, grievance. And that is where there's the
Loss.
fall of
Mm.
consciousness, the
Mm.
separation of the container and the flow, the
Mm.
separation of the masculine and the
Mm.
feminine, separation to every tiny minicular detail that there has all of a sudden become a profound concept of the object and the subject, the object, the subject thinking of itself as object and everything else other as object. The moment of otherness coming from this moment, otherness, separation, grief, self-objectification starting within our own psyche and our own unconscious, the separation between consciousness and unconsciousness that was once awareness, once enlightenment, becoming separated. And then you have the unconscious. And the unconscious, we call it ego, um, but it isn't necessarily so. Because if we were to truly embody our ego, we would be the completeness of body, mind, soul, and spirit. We would be moving from our blueprint, our origin essence, with endowed in each living thing that breathes, unique with its own blueprint and purpose in life. But the the unawareness is a dense matter world. It's the material world. It's the physical body. It's the mind body, and that specifically operating from that place is very susceptible to, I would say, what is the, I would say, the primordial darkness of this universe. It is a mystery. It is the counterpart, you could say, towards the parent, towards unity, towards spirit, the opposite of soul, opposite of spirit. It is unalive. It actually doesn't know. It just does mindlessly, like a virus. It just does. That's what it does. And you've mentioned before the, the, the forms of darkness. Um, there's also different words for it, vintico. But in my magic book, and also another book that I wrote called Adressia, is specifically about this character, the shapeshifter, wanting to understand this primordial darkness, this artificial intelligence, so to speak, and wants to destroy it. But um, the, the he discovers that each thing, everything is susceptible to it. The moment when we think of ourselves as incomplete when we are, the moment when we believe that illusion and we live in this fear and doubt and overthinking and literally being mind killers of our reality, because when we spiral in that, we manifest that. We are literal creators spiraling still in that mindset that we are incomplete, and that is hence the world we live in, to the tiniest detail of architecture and culture and behavior. When actually this primordial darkness hasn't got any power over us the moment we become aware of it. But because we still live in a majority in an environment that does abide moving from that energy, um, it still has a lot of power. That was a lot.
That was a lot. It was amazing though. So I wouldn't want to take it away from you. I might try and give an example or two to try and draw out what I heard you speaking about. For example, I have a thing here. I have I have something, right? And it's an object. And I have it here with me in my grasp. And it's mango juice. Mhm. When I'm listening to you, if I feel the desire for mango juice, but I realize that my mango juice is about to run out. And so I feel a sense of preemptive grief or loss in relation to the mango juice. Then I can become deeply distracted, deeply disconnected from being here, from being present to the being which is here. And instead, I'm stuck in uh, wanting something external, to feel full. Um, and I mean, so that's an example of sort of um, the way that our consciousness can seem to get caught up, and it can seem to get caught up in something that I would call sort of horizontality, rather than so to me, beingness and the being mode connect with a more vertical dimension of experience, which is about dropping in more deeply to being here. In a there's something vertical about that, or this orientation aligns with connecting with spirit or connecting with the eternal. Whereas an obsession with the mango juice, there's something more horizontal about that in the sense of material. Like in the sense that although it's made of material, it doesn't really matter. Doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? It's in it doesn't really matter in relation to that which is more relevant, because what's more relevant is the being, the being here. Um, unless, of course, I'm starving and then I fall all the way back down Maslow's hierarchy and end up needing to go get some more mango juice. But luckily, there is abundance. And this is the point, is that there is actually enough. There is enough. There's more than enough in such a way that the mindset of scarcity can hijack our consciousness. It seems that the mindset of scarcity is based on lack, and it's something to outgrow. It's something which is coming from an inner child part, in my opinion, that did not learn that there is enough, but which instead receives the individual identity of there is not enough. Specifically,
Mm.
not enough
Mm.
love to go around. And what that points to is a opportunity for the development of more culture, in the sense of culture as an engine for love, so that all the beings feel that there is enough love to go around, and that the mindset of abundance is more available to us. And therefore, that inner child doesn't get wounded in the first place, we hope. Um, I think there's definitely an opportunity for a lot of good inner work to be done there. It doesn't have to be like, we don't have to be invulnerable. I'm not talking about becoming Achilles today. Um, that's for another day. But the point that I was making is that when we can develop in a specific kind of environment, an evolutionary environment that affords us the opportunity to connect with the sense of abundance or the sense of enoughness, the sense of being full or being whole, being complete, is still able to become and grow and evolve, but a sense of there being enough and being connected with that wholeness. Then, like from out of that context, from out of those conditions, when we're constrained by wholeness rather than by partiality, then it's far more difficult to be hijacked by a mode of left hemispheric biased thinking and being, which is addictive, and which specifically it throws a tantrum when it feels that there's not enough. And we get stuck in that tantrum. We get stuck in the extreme emotions of the left hemisphere. And I invite anyone to go and check out Ian McGilchrist on this topic to verify the distinction I'm making between right hemispheric and left hemispheric modes of being here. Um, and where I wanted to go from there is that when we can recognize that the left hemisphere has gotten into this bind of, it's actually a combination of sort of the engineering mind and autism that sort of created a certain kind of uh, personality that was easily hijacked and emotionally vulnerable and led us to feel scarcity. Um, we're sort of talking about the way that consciousness is vulnerable to that, and that we can fall into less consciousness, or uh, it's a kind of consciousness which is overly focused on that there is not enough, and in that way it becomes possessive, it becomes selfish. Um, I wanted to point out a couple of things there. One of them is the relations with time, and the second is the connection between possessiveness and possession, and hence evil. And so on the first point, the point about time, what's often talked about in this context is that part of the development of human consciousness involved a recognition of temporality. And what that means is a recognition that I was born and that I'm going to die, and that hence we can plan for the future and things like that. And this is often lauded as, well, then we can save surplus food and then have enough for the winter. And so being conscious of temporality is a step forwards. And although it might be true that foresight is deeply valuable in some ways, what's revealed there is also a bias toward temporality and away from eternity. And what that means is, again, it's a bias toward horizontality and away from verticality, a bias toward the material and away from the spiritual, as I try to elaborate what the point is. And so the point is that we became overly identified with this particular incarnation, this particular life, which is it's a tricky one because it's like, well, we are, of course, you are Kishan and I am Sam, and it makes sense to be afraid of my own death, and there's something deeply human about that, and I'm not denying that, but I'm saying that there's a certain kind of mindset, there's a certain way of thinking, which is thinking on behalf of the whole, on behalf of the whole, on behalf of the tribe, on behalf of the
Mm.
family. It's in evolutionary theory, it's about groups, kin selection or group selection rather than individual selection, something like that. And the point is that there's a way of thinking on behalf of the lineage, which is a deeper kind of genetic intelligence, which is less selfish, less egotistical, less possessive, and much more deep in the body. It's kind of lineage-based thinking. And it can lead people to literally sacrifice themselves for the sake of the whole in reality. And what that implies is that it's a kind of thinking which we became disconnected from. We became disconnected from that whole, that sense of I am because we are. We got overly invested in the I am and not invested enough in the we are. And this leads to possessiveness, it leads to selfishness, it leads to fear of our own death. Not to say it's in a sense, being afraid of our own death is irrational because it doesn't help to be afraid of it. It's still going to happen. And so the point that I'm making there is that I'll make one further point about that, which is that Heidegger pointed out that this over-identification with a single incarnation or over-identification with the ego, it's not only the result of the loss of access to mystical experience, empirically measurable mystical experience in our life, and so reconnection with the source of who we really are, the truth of our high nature. Um, it's also the case that when our identity becomes invested in the ego to such an extent that it naturally and inevitably leads to nihilism. And the reason it leads to nihilism is because, in the sense of past, present, and future, this is a linear model of time, which is very different to a circular or mythological way of relating to time, which is more cyclical or spiral. But this linear way of relating to time, right? Past, present, and future. Well, in terms of the past, I was born, and the future, I'm going to die. In what way are those past and future present? They're present as not here. The past is not here. It's an absence. And the future is not yet. It's an absence. And so what we've done when we adopted that temporality as a mode of being is we invested our identity in an absence, in absences. And thus we invested ourselves in nihilism. I think Heidegger talked about this in connection with the forgetfulness of being, the forgetting, and we were talking about this earlier, forgetting who we really are. And so alethetic unveiling or revealing of the truth, of the core of who and what we really are, is a way of reconnecting with the source. It's a way of restoring our access to the vertical or to the eternal. By the Indigenous Australians, it's called the dreaming, and it goes by different names in many different parts of the world. Um, so that was the first point that I wanted to make, which is on the topic of temporality. Um, the second point that I wanted to make, if I may, was the connection between like this kind of, again, left hemispheric, tantrumy kind of possessiveness of the ego and the way that our identities became biased and reduced to that kind of a mode of being as a result of the loss of specific psychotechnologies that used to inform our consciousness, and which in my practice I am actively trying to recover. When we lost those practices, we turned to this more egotistical and possessive way of thinking, way of being. And part of what you were pointing to in talking about that is that there was a connection between our possessiveness, our addictive desire to have things, and vulnerability to possession. And so that I don't talk too long, I wonder if I might ask you about that as we circle back around to this problem of theoremorphic spirit symbolism in fairy tales, to quote from Jung, and also the problem of evil. Um, like you mentioning, like it's kind of like the origins of religion have to do with sort of the trickster god, right, which appeared in the form of a animal spirit, right, that we could shapeshift into. Part of the function of the soul, in my opinion, if I understand the anthropology correctly, is that it has the capacity to hunt the spirit god in the form of its animally trickstery nature. One of the capacities of the soul is as a spiritual hunter. Um, I could elaborate about that, but I'll just sort of open that as a topic that I think it's valuable to discuss. Um, I would sort of say that the soul is in a relationship with that form of spirit, and when we become disconnected from our own soul, it becomes vulnerable to becoming the hunted, when in reality we're supposed to be the hunter, spiritually speaking. And so to be
Mm.
to become like the gods, or to um and theogen, right? To sort of engodify and in theogen. I need to look up the etymology of entheogen, but it's like to become like the gods, right? Sort of by choice, right? And sort of on purpose, rather than having it happen to one. And again, this distinction, but this choice, right? The autonomy, the sovereignty, which you were invoking, the choice to become like God is the key distinction between trauma and therapy. The choice to become like God is the key distinction between trauma and therapy. When something happens to us, possession, it's trauma. When we choose to do it, become like the gods, it's theurgy, not possession. And it's, in appropriate ritual contexts, healthy and also a function of the soul. And it restores the truth of our nature, which is ensouled bodies. And so for me, that is sort of drawing out the what I understand, that this connection between the possessiveness of the ego and possession as a state of being is that when we get wrapped up in a overly possessive, overly egotistical mode of being, then we become deeply vulnerable to possession by the trickster god, by the trickster animal theomorphic god that is called the Wendigo in some cultures, or it's got different names in different cultures, right? But it's like the original
Mm.
form of the Godhead, which is this disowned part of the unconscious, which is both like supraconscious, like amazingly powerful and glorious, but also shadowy at the same time, and therefore very dangerous. And when we
Mm.
become disconnected from the power of the soul, from the function of the soul, then we become vulnerable. And we become disconnected from the power of soul when when we fall into egoic consciousness and the differentiating, dividing um, scarcity mentality that is native to the ego. And so
Mm.
to make ourselves less vulnerable to possession, it's necessary to develop the soul. And part of developing the soul is remembering that we have one and getting in touch with
Mm.
her, it, whatever form it takes, and restoring that aspect of our being, and specifically restoring the capacity to take up the perspective of the soul. Perspective taking as a skill. When we can take up the perspective of the soul, which for me involves these qualities of childlikeness and spontaneity and aliveness and joyousness and yeah, improvisation. We can learn to be ensouled. And this is also making us spiritually more mature. Um, the capacity to take up the perspective of the soul allows us to integrate uh, spiritual, I don't know, phenomena healthily rather than being possessed by them. Um, And that was a lot too. I want to see if we can draw out what the impact of all that on you was, and then we can get to the final couple of words of the thesis title.
This is quite interesting. There were a few things that you said um, that came that did something. Before you talked about something, point one. If you were to summarize point one, um,
The way that ego conditions our relations to
yes, yes,
we fell into space and time, which are aspects of the mother. We fell into illusion, the 3D, when we're in reality hyperdimensional beings.
yes. So the impact that it had on me is quite a lot. Um, Super interesting. Selfishness. Selfishness is very, very the hurt. When the environment cannot provide a certain sense of care or safety, um, that's where hurt begins, trauma begins. That's where we're more prone to um, you say this trickstery energy to be possessed by it, right? To start moving from that mode of being. It's a survival mode of being out of the fear of actually not being part of the collective, to belong. We want to belong. We are creatures that desire to belong. And I say that's where we hold on to things and we become possessive um, because we're afraid to lose that which gives that which we yearn for, and that is the safety and the love. But because that is not taught, or the environment couldn't provide it, um, many of us don't know any other way. So what bullying is, what extraction is, what commodifying is, what capitalism is all innately that hurt child. And that child is not a baby, but then becomes an infant, um, incapable of taking self-care, of self-responsibility,
Sovereignty.
incapable, and moves from a place of individualism because it knows not any better. The disconnection from wholeness makes everything tasteless. The senses are numb. It cannot perceive the divinity in everything. So, whatever it thinks or assumes to perceive through a lens will always be dissatisfactory. Whatever is eaten or taken to, because it is without the consciousness that everything is soul filled, and thus cannot perceive it or take it to. So the hunger lingers without actually letting it fill oneself. And one continues to consume. And here we are talking about a nervous system, a way of co regulation that has been so dysregulated, it is numb, that it only thrives or seems to find satisfaction in short term feedback loops, and also short term immediate satisfaction. And that's where we get into addictions and disorder. And you said that when we hyper identify with that and our thoughts and a identity that can encompass us to be part of something, we limit ourselves to the entirety spectrum of all the archetypical forces from which our consciousness is compromised out of. And what this order actually is actually um, a hyper development of just one archetypical aspect, which brings forth literal um, demon archetypes embodied. When there's nothing wrong with the devil, we also need the devil. It is because it is out of equilibrium balance with all the other archetypes, it becomes destructive. Hence, why we have these so called narcissists and dictators in our world that literally, from their own disorder, manifest disorder in the world. And um, to Claire, and to my own perspective, there's nothing wrong with the animal. The animal is also a very beautiful part of our being, of reality. It is raw unfilteredness, right? As
Mm,
it's something worse than animal. This Vintico, this
mm,
it is indeed a shapeshifter, which is funny because in my story, it is a story about a shapeshifter trying to understand this shapeshifter that spreads this poison.
mm,
This primordial darkness is this artificial intelligence is.
mm. The implication is that something was neglected. Something's been neglected, and that the
Mm,
manifestation of evil is a symptomatology of neglect. Something was cut off, something was cast
I,
out,
yeah,
you know, and
yes,
and and it
yes,
appears as a
yes.
demon. It appears demonic. So, like
Yes.
specifically, what I'm saying is, when the Christians burned all the pagans and stopped them from doing a series of seasonal rituals that were devoted to specific nature gods, which the Christians understood as demon worship, then when the Christians did that, then they became vulnerable to possession. They became vulnerable to possession by those natural forces, right? Which have to be safely expressed in the right contexts. And
Mm.
that cannot be profane because that's um they're structurally built into like our cosmos, right? I mean, this is all through Platonism, for example. It's like there has to be a way of um spreading the good word that can reclaim and exempt an entire series of what used to be pagan rituals. And I mean, Paul Kingsnorth, for example, has expressed this in versions of Christianity that are very pro nature. So I'm not pulling that out of nowhere. Um, Kishan, there was so much there already. Like one of the things is the connection with. Um, I wanted to talk about this like short-term thinking, right? But it's because it's a kind of a way of thinking. Like I mentioned, multipolar traps, right? I'm talking about arms races or the tragedy of the commons. These are variations of a quote unquote multipolar trap from game theory, which involves people choosing the option which is best for them in the short term, even though it's worse for everyone in the long term, which is a kind of default to a kind of selfishness or a kind of temptation, which is short-term thinking, right? And the solution is basically to remind people to recognize that we're all unified, that we have shared interests in common, and that we can make agreements about that to avoid temptation. Um, and so it's sort of to apply that, the implication is that so when we get wrapped up in our own identity, when we become more egotistical and more um, vulnerable to possession and more possessive, and um, when that happens, then um, we become in a way self-absorbed. There's a selfishness or focusing on oneself, taking things personally that seems to go along with that. And
Mm.
there's a way that biases one to think more for themselves than for the whole, because we have needs that are not getting met, maybe, And the consequence of that is this kind of short-term thinking. Um, and it's a kind of you talked about it, this deep fear of abandonment, right? The fear of aloneness, fear of loneliness, because isolation meant exile, meant death, meant vulnerability to possession. This is even today among Indigenous Australians, right? They're going off on one's own makes one vulnerable to um, psychoses of different kinds, we might say. It's very suspicious to go off on your own like that. The tribe is the home. It's the source of love and belonging and unity and connection and safety, spiritual safety just as much as physical safety. Um, what I'm sort of saying is, um, I'm saying a couple of things here. One of them is about the origins of this short-term thinking in identification with the ego. When we identify with the ego as a result of the specific kinds of trauma or lack of love, and when we identify with the ego as a result of the loss of specific kinds of psychotechnologies that were designed to reconnect us with a sense of wholeness, when we over-identify with the ego as a result of those things, then we become vulnerable to the kinds of thinking that are short term, that get us stuck in multipolar traps, that get us stuck in selfishness among the tribe, which creates tribes that don't work very well, and which just gets us stuck in tribal warfare between the tribes, which creates intertribal relations that are not very effective or functional. Um, all of that seems to come about as a result of the lack of abundant love and the lack of specific cultural psychotechnologies designed to generate and spread that love, among other qualities. The sense of abundance, and the mode of being which is more abundant. Um, I'm thinking there's a Bible verse that I'm thinking of here, but I can't remember it. I'll see if it comes up. Um, to then, I sort of wanted to add one other thing there, which is like what I just pointed to was a cultural solution to multipolar traps. Right? Again, what I just pointed to was a cultural solution to multipolar traps. I'm saying that all of I'm saying, roughly speaking, indigenous wisdom, I don't know, proponents of indigenous wisdom, like Tyson Yonkaporta, among others, have pointed out that indigenous wisdom traditions originally arose in response to ecological overshoot, roughly speaking. As in, once we got stone tools, then we started overhunting a lot of the animals, which leads to ecological overshoot, which leads to imbalance with nature, right? That's a bad thing because we become dysregulated and then we destroy ourselves because we overhunt all the animals, right? And then so indigenous wisdom traditions came along and they said, hey, we should restrain ourselves. We should not do those things. We should not go and hunt all the animals. We should uh, maintain the small scale population that we have because we already have enough. And what I'm saying essentially is that although that kind of indigenous wisdom, let's say, responds to a certain kind of problem, namely the problem of scarcity, um, and the problem of ecological overshoot, it's actually the problem of the discovery of the sphere of memetics, but I'll leave that to the side for the moment. The point that I'm making is, although it was on the right track, there wasn't enough culture. We didn't have enough uh, cultural software to uh, maintain our sense of access to the attitude of enoughness, to the attitude of abundance. And so we got stuck in having the feeling of scarcity. And so this opens a space for not only recovery of, um, let's say, indigenous ways of thinking that are rationally defensible on these grounds, but also cultural innovation, genuine cultural innovation in light of the need for more love and abundance in the world. And that we could actually get serious, following John Vervaeke, Jordan Hall, Daniel Schmachtenberger, Jamie Wheel. These are not like pushover thinkers. You know, these are serious thinkers. Um, yeah. So sort of in that context, um, I've forgotten what I wanted to bring up next. Oh, I wanted to talk about symbolic cognition in that context, because one of the things that you were saying is that um, there's this tendency for fear to lead into it might be a kind of self-destructiveness or to keep us trapped in a self-forgetting. And what I'm sort of saying there is that the ego actually has this built-in program that it's designed to die. Because the whole thing about the ego is that we're designed to die and be reborn, which happened in initiation rituals involving very powerful psychotechnologies, which we've forgotten, right? And we've partly forgotten those as a result of the decline of indigenous wisdom and shamanism, right? We've forgotten all the shamanic practices, and now we take everything literally. Now we take everything literally. And part of what that means is that we think it's us that's gonna die. But we don't realize that we ourselves are symbols. We are symbols. And like I can't elaborate more about what we mean. Essentially, what I'm saying is that we are actually our souls, which we have forgotten, and the identities that we identify with are actually symbolic expressions of that soul. Um, anyway, the point that I'm making here is that when we take ourselves too literally, when we take ourselves too literally, then we default into a kind of suicidality, which is saying that, oh, it's me that has to die, when in reality it's supposed to be a symbolic death. It's supposed to be the death and rebirth, initiation,
Yes,
resurrection motif that is common through all different. I mean, this Margaret Mead pointed this out back in 1952, is that one of the main common threads between indigenous cultures the world over is that they all have initiation rituals for men. And the reason that that's important is because unless you have initiation rituals for men, we don't remember who we really are because it's not built into our bodies in the way that it is with women. Women are naturally
mm,
initiated as a result of menstruation, which, by the way, was a um,
hmm.
closely connected with the sort of
Wow,
spiritual power and shamanic
wow.
practices. I did a whole series of
Yeah,
that. It's
yeah,
called
yeah,
Human Origins. It's 2017
yeah.
anthropology text that talks about the spiritual significance of menstruation in traditional cultures. I won't go on about that, only to say that initiation rituals are important and the recovery of symbolic cognition, a la Jung, is important. What I'm talking about is like drawing mandalas, creating sacred geometry, like practicing art together after breath work and things like that. The reason that that's important, right, is because it helps us to describe and express the kind of phenomena which is closer to the core of our being, which is where it's not the kind of thinking which is up here. It's not the kind of differentiating, dividing, binary thinking which is native to what I would call the mind or an egoic way of thinking. It's not like that at all. It's a kind of thinking which is more geometrical and more symbolic and more artistic and more imagistic and more artistic. And that mode of being, it's a symbolic mode of being. It's a more imaginal mode of being. It actually helps us recover access to the ground of being. What I'm sort of saying there is that in the same way that we can solve the multipolar trap problem by recovering our access to lineage thinking, like rather than thinking selfishly about our little ego, we can think about the tribe, we can think about the whole, we can think about the
Hmm.
lineage, and there's a kind of genetic intelligence that I invoked there, straight out of evolutionary theory, by the way. I'm sort of going along with that. I'm sort of saying that if we can recover symbolic cognition, we cover capacity. We recover the capacity to express something closer to the depths of our being, down in the depths, because there are certain phenomena, let's say, that are only able to be expressed in that kind of a form that our words cannot touch. And I feel that
Hmm. Hmm.
expressing such phenomena, and I could be more specific about what I mean by that, but at the moment I feel that expressing such phenomena is like really key to recovering access to the kind of depths of our being that I feel
Yes.
it's impossible to draw up into consciousness more and reconnect our consciousness with the roots, right? Reconnect our consciousness with the roots to make it more sustainable, more grounded.
So what I hear here is that because we've gone into overdrive, into this overthinking, we have become incapable of thinking in ways that are long term. We've become incapable of being able to sit with whatever takes place inside of us. Um, it frightens us because it's overwhelming, it's infinite. It's this infinite um, divine feminine flowing through us, and because we haven't honed our vessel, we haven't um, built our bodies to be containers for it, we fall and we collapse. And in Hinduism, in Tantra, for example, they beautifully um, symbolically portray this with Shiva Shakti. And for example, when there was a lot of disorder in the world, Rakshas, demons, were roaming around, and Kali, the feminine, was enraged. Her rage was so uncontrollable at some point that the entire world and the entire universe was at stake. And um, what we see here is that anger without direction, anger without intention, becomes only destructive. And I can also connect that to this amazing cartoon. Many kids know it, Avatar: The Last Airbender, where we have this archetype, the Fire Lord, and fire can be connected to also masculine energy. But if masculine energy is not knowing of itself, and it is just not, let's say, honed and skilled, and you know, it can become impulsive, it can become destructive in a way, and even selfish, because it doesn't know its own potential and its own strength. And that strength can then be turned into misuse of it. But once becoming aware of one's strength and power, power can turn into protection, which is the archetype Vishnu in Hindu uh, myth, mythology. Um, that power can, in fact, be protection and an anchor. And so I'm
Can
going a
I can
little
I
bit
I,
all
I,
over
I
the
want to
place.
offer something there. Can I briefly? It's important, otherwise I wouldn't interrupt you. What I want to say is that our ego identifies as the shadow. For example, I am not enough. They're all derivative identities. I am not enough. I am unworthy. I am
I
unlovable.
am this,
I
I
am
am
angry.
that.
I am
Yeah.
afraid. I am guilty. I am X, Y, and Z, right? All the elements of the shadow. What you just pointed out is that those elements of the shadow are property of Kali. They're not ours. They belong to the earth. They're
No, no,
not
not per
ours.
se Kali.
Oh, well, it
Not
doesn't.
per se
I'm
Kali.
saying symbolically, Kali, as in Kali as representative of the Great Mother. I actually think it's the world soul. As in, what I'm saying is that by creating appropriate ritual context where we can devote those elements of the shadow to the unconscious world soul, that world soul can be drawn into awakening.
Yes.
As in, if we get
Yes.
out of our own way
Yeah.
by instead of identifying with the shadow as the root of the ego, offering the elements of the shadow to the mother, then
Yes.
she might appreciate it. And that's integrating paganism
Yeah.
within a near Christianity.
Yes. To connect it to the story, then, is that in this particular case where Kali was so enraged and blinded by her own rage, that it became uncontrol. She became uncontrollable of herself and her own capacity, her own fire, her own destruction, because she was blind to it. Um, Divine masculinity needed to step in and intervene for awareness to be brought back. And this only happened when Kali stepped on Shiva. She stepped on him, she trampled over him, and only at that moment she became aware of the destruction that she's been causing. And so, um, what I'm where I'm going with this is that the rage in our world, the rage for unfairness, the rage for injustice, once that has become and turned into intentional direction, cohesiveness, and action, then we talk about integration. And this came about actually through the feminine initiating that within us, in our psyches, to bring about the divine masculine, because before the divine masculine was asleep. And so, um, in Avatar: The Last Airbender, for example, um, Avatar Aang, he couldn't, he didn't want it to fight fire with fire. He knew that that wouldn't solve anything. He didn't want it to use the tactics from which unawareness moves from, because then nothing would be solved. Instead, he sought a deeper kind of wisdom, and that is that awareness, that is that integrating of that fire to using it for good, or altogether to take the fire away from those who misuse power and no longer feed it so that the fire dies out by itself. And when we as a collective um, don't feed it our fire anymore, and we use our fire for good, something new can be born, something intentional, the awakening of the divine masculine that has been asleep in our world, I would say. There's a lot of there's a lot of flowy energy, but no container yet. And it's super important to hone our bodies for that container. Else our nervous systems wouldn't be able to um, have the capacity to let it flow through us in a way that is clean. So we need to hone our bodies, strengthen our minds, uh, become flexible, and um, let go of open up all the blockades in our body so that it can stream freely. Um, yeah, yeah, integration. You muted yourself.
Noticed
My
earlier we
friend.
were talking about the disenchantment of the world, the profaning of the world, in context of energetic constipation, as in we were blockading nature, our own nature. We were trying to stop and control and repress, and that deeply does not work. Doesn't work at all. It just delays the problem. Um, I feel like you said many amazing things. I wanted to ask you. So it seemed like you connected the sort of the purpose of the origin of the masculine, which is a great question to ask. What is the purpose of masculinity? What's the point of there being men in the sense of men being derivative from women genetically? Well, the still point.
That's a huge misunderstanding about
Sorry.
what is masculinity actually. Like, masculinity doesn't have to mean that you are a man in a male body. Masculinity is actually, in certain indigenous languages, there is no he or she. There is just you and I. There is no distinction. They don't have that in their language. How profound is that, that they think
Very.
from this place of unity?
It seems that like if I sort of skip over that tangent going into the non-distinction between male and female and sort of I'm trying to focus on you seem to connect like the origins of the masculine with sealing the vessel alchemically. They talk about this in alchemy too, and in Jungian theory, right? This is like creating a, you could say safe space, or like a container, right? Creating a container. and it's kind of purifying the vessel, right? And there's a way of making the space between us more available, more pure, more clear, um, in such a way that sort of invokes the archetype of stillness. It allows us to, in the sense of the book by Mark Wynne, Renewing the Senses, it allows us to recover the spiritual senses, listening, tasting, seeing that which is between. And it allows us to listen in such a way that we can connect with stillness, quietness, and there's a quality of spaciousness that goes along with those qualities, right? There's like when we connect with th- that point of stillness and quietness, which is here, then that's a space into which life can flow. It's a space into which something can be born. And the tricky thing about that is that we have this capacity, again, experimental phenomenology, multi-stabilities. We have this capacity to take up multiple perspectives. We have this capacity to parallax in the sense of you're the eyes and I'm the ears. You're the eyes and I'm the ears. What are we converging on? Well, we're converging on the still point. And the thing is that we embody all of those perspectives. We are the perspective of the mother. We are the perspective also of that which is being born, the child. We're also the perspective of the midwife, the channel through which the child is born out of the mother. We are mother, midwife, and child, all in one. But the thing is that that clear space, that still point, the archetype of Shiva, is a space into which something new can emerge for the first time. And to me, in this context, I
Mm.
talk about um, the image is the sort of guardians of the galaxy. Like the guardians of the galaxy all get together and they hold the power stone together, and only when they're all holding hands can they hold the power stone. It's kind of the same thing. It's like, well, if we get together, right, retribalization, and we practice neo-monastery model, right? We practice an ecology of practices designed to restore the roots of human culture. If we do that in the right way, let 1,000 fires burn. I want like 1,000 experiments of this, right? Many different ways of practicing this. If we do that, then the space between us can be unveiled, disclosed, uncovered, revealed in such a way that the field of awareness which is between us can come into self-reflective consciousness for the first time, collective awakening. We can become aware as the field of awareness which is between us. And not only that, but we can become aware as the earth itself, matter, all of this. Um, that space which is between us, I've connected with the archetype of the third, the number three. In Christianity, it's the Holy Ghost. In the Greek tradition, it's the Logos. It's that which is between. It's the archetype of the third. It's represented by the peak of the pyramid, um, or by consciousness itself. It's a it's a specific archetype. And sort of what I'm saying is that we become conscious not only as the archetype of the number three, not only as that which is between us, but we also become conscious as the process of the relations between the archetypes of three and four, which is to say, specifically, drawing from experimental phenomenology by Don Ide, it's just to say specifically that that space which is between us, that has an awareness of its own, which is emergent, has an intentionality, it has a directedness, it has intentionality, and it has a directedness. And I'm saying that it has a directedness toward matter, specifically toward the Greek term, I think it's hyle, hyle, toward the receptacle, the vessel, that which receives, which is also the void, the body, the unconscious, that which sleeps, that which is forgotten, that which is forgotten. And I'm saying that if we can give rise to this emergent field of consciousness which is between us and become aware as that consciousness, then we can participate through our agency in the intentionality
Mm.
of that field. And when we do so, we can direct the
Mm.
intentionality. We can participate in the directed intentionality of that field in such a way that directs consciousness toward matter in such a way that allows us to, again, become conscious as matter itself. That's extended awareness, becoming aware as the extended field, recognizing that we are not only, it's not, we have a story, right? We have a story that I am Sam somewhere in here and Kishan is somewhere over there in that little brain, that whoever's witnessing this is stuck within their own little brain, and the thing is that we are, right now, someone is watching this presumably on a screen, which is in the middle of an entire room, an entire world of stuff, which we are also. That is also us. That is also our body. That is also our body, because what are we without the sun? What are we without the trees? What are we without the water? What are we without the mango juice? Extended awareness. And then I want to say, I want to connect this with um, the mode of being that I sort of noticed earlier. There was a sort of, it's a feminine awakening that we're talking about. It's awakening as the circumference, as the world, awakening as the world, not only as that which is between us. And that's not, there's something about, you know how the Christians say that like God was incarnated in Christ? They say that. And it's a sort of there's a way that God is the Sky Father, right? And he sort of incarnates in a specific person, namely Christ, the person of Christ, Jesus Christ, and he's a person. Well, he's like the point in the center of the circle. He's like the focal point. He's God, and it's an anthropocentric awakening, human-centric awakening, awakening as one person. And the thing is that like that was 2000 years ago, right? Or however long ago it was. It was a long time ago, right? And now that Buddhist monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, said the next Buddha will be a Sangha, a community. The next Buddha will be a community. What did he mean? Well, part of what I take him to mean is a sort of paraphrase of what Jung talked about. Jung talked about not anthropocentric awakening, but Genesis in the sense of cosmocentric awakening, namely cosmogenesis, the birth of a new universe, or namely the birth of a new mode of being within this universe. And like as a result of taking up that mode of being, one can perceive the universe in a new way. So cosmogenesis. This is having to do with the myths of the origins, the myths of birth of the universe. It's not the awakening of one being, although it may also be that. It's the awakening of the world. It's a cosmocentric awakening. It's a cosmocentric awakening. It's not an anthropocentric awakening.
Mhm.
It's very, very different. It's really important to understand this because it's specific. I'm being specific. Um,
Yes.
And really, because in phenomenology, right, there's a focal point, there's an object. We talked about this, Kishan. We talked about this at the start of the conversation. There's an object which is being focused on. We could say it's you, or we could say it's me, or we could say it's the space between us, which is not really an object. But the point is, we're still focusing on one point. And that's a quality of the left hemisphere. The left hemisphere is that which focuses on one point. And what I'm saying is, again, following from many different thinkers on this, namely Ian McGilchrist in this place, what about the circumference? What about the right hemispheric mode of attention, which gives our attention to all of this? What about awakening as that? What about awakening as the mode of being? In a sense, it's the subject which uh, looks at the object, but it's not. It's not. It's more like the witnessing awareness. Anyway, I'll maybe stop there. But yeah, cosmocentric awakening. This is this is so important because we were talking about what Genesis means, what Genesis is. Because this is what the biblical scholars say. For goodness sake, I'm not a Christian theologian, but it's like Genesis is happening now. Genesis is happening now. It's not something that happened a long time ago. It's eternal. It's eternal. It's happening now. It's not temporal. Well, how is it happening now? Well, right now, the universe is being born. It's not a being, it's not a person which is awakening, it's the world. Cosmocentric awakening. And this is really
Mm.
important because it's not human centric, it's not egocentric, it's not focused on the I. It's more about the we, and it's not the we even of the tribe, because you were talking about this. You were saying that tribes can get caught up in this tribal way of thinking, which is thinking about me at a tribal level, which is a different kind of egotism. It's not I, the individual, it's I, the tribe,
Mhm.
which is still derivative of the whole, because the whole point is that we're an organ of consciousness on behalf of the whole. We're conscious on behalf of everything. Cosmocentric. I am because we are, meaning all of this. We are all of this. We are all of this. And we
Yes.
don't feel that until we do, and we can. And I know how.
Mm, wow.
Let me correct that. I don't know how. I intuit how, and how, like, the way is something which, again, emerges and arises naturally as a result of the organic, symbiotic collaboration between sovereign beings, embodied sovereign beings. That can tie me back to the title, right, of the thesis on architecting evolving ecological bodies
In symbiotic harmony.
in symbiotic harmony. Boom, mic drop. What do you mean by in symbiotic harmony? Meaning in harmony with nature. I mean, this is exactly what we were just talking about. It's a way of thinking which is on behalf of all of us, not human-centric anymore, not anthropocentric, but awakening as the world,
Mm.
as matter itself, bringing matter into the consciousness that we have, recognizing the awareness within matter, or specifically within the archetype of the fourth, of which matter is an aspect. I mentioned other aspects, including the
It's
unconscious,
interesting
the
that you
unbodied,
say,
the receptacle, the vessel, the void. Sorry.
yeah, it's interesting that it's four because there are three syllables in Aum, and the fourth one is silence, completion. And
Huh.
also, when we talk about, you have like unconscious, let's say that's where the universe started, explosion, Big Bang. Then you have perhaps conscious and unconscious, but then when all of those are merged together and doesn't move from this mode of um, individualism, but as wholeness, and um, wholeness in oneself, recognizing that wholeness means full participation, full being with everything that is, and it's just play, and it is born from when nothing is taken personally anymore. You're not attacked. The ego's not attacked. And you know that nothing, in fact, is personal, then the next practice is oneness with everything, oneness with um, the mode of being that we're sharing now, oneness with being in the temperature we're surrounded by, with the sounds of the birds, oneness with the surfaces we sit on, oneness with a stone, once whatever, oneness, to eventually this last syllable, that silence, awareness, and where symbiotic harmony is just absolute co-creation, where there is no distinction between the masculine and the feminine anymore. We There is this because you can say the masculine is the one that contains, perhaps it's a frame, and what's drawn on the frame, that's the expression. But the one holding the hand that gives direction, then is that masculine again, and is the canvas now the feminine. And all of a sudden, there's no distinction anymore. The yang has become the yin, the yang, and that is love making, that is unity, that is tantra, that is alchemical perfection, that is the forge where the collision happened between those energies. And the collision, the love making, is also the place of the birth, the birthing. And so the masculine principle of the universe and the feminine principle of the universe. They are space holding one another. They are holding one another, actually. They're containers for one another, but both needed to be fully initiated before they actually could, in fact, hold another and see one another and appreciate one another and see that they are not separate. And so, in that co creation, they parent together, they become the parent. It's not just the mother, it's the father. It's mother, father, and one, the parent,
Mm.
that does the birthing and is that which is being born and birthed, and that's the child. And perhaps um, evolution will take this much further, where parent and child become one in their play. Um, and perhaps it will continue on and on and on. But this co creation is just seeing completely, entirely that we are a singularity communicating. And if and I would say the that which holds us is the ethics of care, that listens, that is reciprocal, that is a feedback loop. I think you mentioned something about circulation. It's a feedback loop. And when we have our highest value in in prayer, in togetherness, we are the ones shaping our universes, dreaming of our universes into manifestation, polishing them from love and
Amen.
harmony.
And harmony.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Sam. This has been so wonderful.
So wonderful. I really let's do some appreciations. Like Kishan, like what you brought today was nothing short of astonishing. I feel I was like just in awe of so many of the things that you said. I was like, wow, like how can I possibly follow that? It was you have a gift for expressing the inexpressible. And you managed to tie together so many different concepts in one expression that is like, yeah, poetic. It's like a the mode of being is like hymnal. The way that you speak is incantory. Yeah, very, very special.
Also, some appreciation from my side. Thank you so much, Sam, for giving somewhat of a structure to this. I found myself quite um, finding it challenging to find some structure in it, but kind of with the ingredients that we were weaving, that we were able to create some tangible story out of this. So thank you so much for your sharpness, for your presence, and yes, for our vulnerability. Thank you.